3 shots. That's all it took to destroy everything I'd built in 15 years. The echo still rang across the Montana territory as Jake Morrison pressed his back against the boulder, Winchester rifle clutched in weathered hands. Blood seeped through his shirt where a Confederate bullet had grazed his ribs. Behind him, Billy Martinez, 19 years old and green as spring grass, fought to control his breathing. "Mr. Morrison," Billy whispered, voice cracking. "They got Tom, Charlie, and Dutch. All 3 of them." Jake closed his eyes for a moment, seeing their faces. Good men. Men who trusted him to bring them home from this cattle drive. Just like the men who trusted him at Chancellorsville 17 years ago. "Stay low, boy," Jake muttered, checking his ammunition. 6 rounds left. "We're going to make it out of this canyon." But even as he said it, Jake knew this wasn't just another rustler attack. The men who'd ambushed them wore Union blue uniforms, crisp, clean, military precision in every movement. And leading them, mounted on a black stallion like some dark angel of vengeance, was a face Jake had hoped never to see again. Colonel Marcus Donovan. Black Hand Donovan, they'd called him during the war. The man who left Jake's cavalry unit to die in a Confederate trap while he retreated to safety with the artillery. "Jake Morrison," Donovan's voice carried across the rocks. Cultured Boston accent unchanged by 17 years in the wilderness. "Still playing hero, I see." Jake rose slowly, rifle trained on the figure in black. Donovan sat his horse 50 yards away, just out of accurate pistol range but well within rifle shot. Too easy. The bastard was playing some deeper game. "Donovan," Jake's voice carried the weight of old battlefields. "Should have known you'd crawl out from whatever rock you've been hiding under." "Oh, I haven't been hiding, Jacob. I've been planning, building, recruiting." Donovan gestured to the men positioned on the canyon walls, at least a dozen, all armed with modern repeating rifles. "You see, I never forgot what you cost me at Chancellorsville. Your insubordination, your moral grandstanding." The memory hit like a physical blow. April 30th, 1863. Donovan ordering the execution of Confederate prisoners. Jake refusing the order. The argument that split their unit just as General Lee launched his surprise attack through the wilderness. "I saved those prisoners' lives," Jake said. "You saved 20 Confederate lives and cost me 200 Union soldiers." Donovan's composure cracked, revealing the madness beneath. "My career died that day because of your conscience, Morrison. But today, we settle accounts." Billy gripped Jake's arm. "Mr. Morrison, there's too many of them." "Easy, son." Jake never took his eyes off Donovan. "What do you want?" Donovan's expression shifted to something resembling satisfaction. "Your ranch, your cattle, your life. But first, I want you to know that your lovely wife, Sarah, is enjoying the hospitality of my men at Devil's Canyon." The world tilted. Sarah, captured, helpless, in the hands of these animals. Jake's trigger finger tightened, but Donovan was already wheeling his horse around. 48 hours, Morrison. Come to Devil's Canyon alone, or Mrs. Morrison will learn firsthand how my men treat the wives of traitors." The Confederate force melted away into the rocks like smoke, leaving Jake and Billy alone with 3 corpses in the weight of an impossible choice. The ride back to Silver Creek Ranch stretched endless under the Montana sky. Jake pushed his horse hard, Billy keeping pace beside him, both men lost in their own dark thoughts. The wind carried the scent of pine and approaching storm, but all Jake could smell was gunpowder and blood. Silver Creek Ranch sprawled across a valley floor that had once seemed like paradise. 15 years Jake had worked this land, built it from nothing with his own hands and the help of good neighbors. The main house stood solid and proud, white clapboard siding gleaming in the afternoon sun. Sarah's flower garden bloomed bright against the front porch, but no smoke rose from the chimney. No dogs barked at their approach. "Stay behind me," Jake ordered as they dismounted. The front door hung open, splintered where boots had kicked it in. Inside, furniture lay overturned, Sarah's china scattered across the hardwood floor. Jake found the note pinned to their bedroom door with a Confederate officer's dagger. Morrison, 15 years ago, you left 200 good men to die for your misplaced conscience. Now you'll learn what loss truly means. Your wife lives, for now, at Devil's Canyon Fortress. Come alone in 48 hours, or she dies screaming. But know this, Jacob, I've found a greater purpose than mere revenge. The South will rise again, starting with Montana Territory. Fort Helena falls in 3 days. A new Confederate state will be born from the ashes of the Union's arrogance. Your wife's life for your surrender. That seems fair payment for your betrayal at Chancellorsville. Colonel M. Donovan, commanding officer, Army of the New Confederacy. Billy read over Jake's shoulder, face pale. Mr. Morrison, what's he talking about? Army of the New Confederacy? Jake crumpled the note, mind racing through implications. Donovan wasn't just seeking personal vengeance, he was launching a rebellion. Fort Helena, the main federal arsenal serving western Montana Territory, held enough weapons and ammunition to arm 1,000 men. If Donovan captured it, he could carve out his own breakaway republic in the chaos. Billy, how fast can you ride to Cedar Falls? Hour and a half if I push hard. Why? Find Sheriff Rodriguez. Tell him Jake Morrison needs him. Needs all of them. Tell him it's time for one last mission. Billy nodded, understanding the gravity without needing explanation. During the war, Jake's unit had been legendary among the cavalry. The Devil Dogs of the 7th Pennsylvania, they'd called them. Men who'd followed Jake through hell itself and lived to tell about it. What about Mrs. Morrison? Jake checked his weapons, mind already shifting into military mode. I'm going to get her back, but first, we're stopping a war. As Billy rode hard toward Cedar Falls, Jake Morrison stood alone in his ransacked home, surrounded by the debris of 15 years of peace. He walked to the mantelpiece, where his Congressional Medal of Honor sat in its presentation case, awarded 6 months ago for conspicuous gallantry during an Apache raid that had saved a wagon train of settlers. The medal felt heavier than he remembered as he pinned it inside his coat. Some decorations were earned, others were just burdens waiting to be justified. The ride to Cedar Falls took Jake through familiar country, rolling hills and pine forests where he'd hunted as a younger man. But now every shadow might hide Confederate guns. Every bend in the trail could be an ambush. He pushed his horse harder than he should have, but time was bleeding away like water through cupped hands. Cedar Falls squatted on the bank of Willow Creek like a wounded animal. Once it had been a thriving mining town. Now half the buildings stood empty, paint peeling and windows broken, but the sheriff's office still flew the American flag, and that was all Jake needed to see. Tom Rodriguez hadn't changed much in the 5 years since Jake had last seen him. Still lean and hard as rawhide, still moved with the careful precision of a man who'd learned that carelessness meant death. The badge on his chest caught the light as he looked up from his paperwork. Well, I'll be damned. Jake Morrison. Tom's weathered face split into a grin. Been too long, hermano. Tom. Jake clasped his old friend's hand. I need help. The smile faded as Jake explained. Donovan's return, Sarah's capture, the plot against Fort Helena. Tom listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. Donovan, Tom spat into the brass spittoon beside his desk. Should have put a bullet in that snake during the war. Can you round up the old crew? Patrick O'Brien's working the silver mine up at Copper Ridge. Still crazy as a shithouse rat. Still loves things that go boom. Maria's running the Broken Wheel Saloon 3 blocks over. She'll know where everyone else ended up. Jake nodded. During the war, Maria Santos had been their intelligence officer, a role that translated well to saloon ownership. If anyone knew the political landscape in Montana Territory, it would be Maria. What about the boy you brought up? Billy? He's family now, Jake said quietly. Lost his father at Shiloh. Served under me. Been looking after the kids since his mother died last winter. Good hands with horses, steady under fire. Tom raised an eyebrow. You planning on adopting him official? Been thinking about it. Sarah and we never had children of our own. Boy needs a name, and I could use a son who understands what we've been through. Before Tom could respond, the front window exploded inward in a shower of glass and gunfire. Jake threw himself behind the heavy oak desk as bullets splintered the wall where he'd been standing. Tom rolled left, drawing his Colt in one smooth motion, returning fire through the shattered window. How many? Jake shouted over the gunfire. 6, maybe 8. Tom triggered 3 rapid shots. Professional setup. They had us bracketed before they opened up. Jake crawled to the gun rack, yanked free a double-barreled shotgun. Outside, he could hear boots on the boardwalk, men moving to flank the building. Donovan's people had found him faster than he'd expected. Back door? Locked from outside. Tom ejected empty shells, reloaded with practiced efficiency. They've got us boxed in tight. Through the gun smoke and chaos, Jake heard a familiar voice shouting orders. Not Donovan, someone else. Someone he should recognize. The shooting stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, Jake could hear his own heartbeat, the creak of settling timber. Sheriff Rodriguez! The voice came from directly outside the front door. Send out Jake Morrison, and nobody else has to die. Tom looked at Jake, eyebrows raised in question. Jake shook his head grimly. Whatever game Donovan was playing, surrender wasn't an option. Then came the sound that changed everything. A woman's scream from somewhere behind the buildings. Not Sarah's voice, but someone in terrible pain. Maria, Tom whispered, face going white. Jake understood immediately. Donovan's men had taken hostages to force their compliance. The old Apache trick. Attack the heart, not the head. How many ways out of this building? Jake asked quietly. 3, front door, suicide. Back door, locked and probably guarded, or, Tom pointed upward, roof hatch, leads to the back alley. Another scream. Closer now. Maria was being tortured to draw them out. Jake made the decision that would define everything that followed. You go through the roof, get to Maria. I'll go out the front door, give you cover. That's suicide, Jake. Maybe, but it's the only play that saves her. Jake checked the shotgun's loads. Besides, I've been marked for death for 17 years anyway. Time to make it count for something. Tom clasped Jake's shoulder. See you in hell, hermano. Save me a whiskey by the fire. The front door of the Cedar Falls Sheriff's Office opened slowly. Jake Morrison stepped onto the boardwalk, shotgun held loose in his right hand, left hand raised in apparent surrender. 6 men in Confederate gray uniforms formed a rough semicircle in the dusty street, rifles trained on his chest. But Jake's attention was fixed on the man standing beside the hitching post. Not Colonel Donovan. This was someone new. Someone wearing the uniform of a Union Army major, but with the confident bearing of a man who'd chosen his side carefully. Major Henry Blackwood, the man said, touching the brim of his hat with mock courtesy. Town mayor and, as of yesterday, military commander of this district under the authority of the new Confederate States of Montana. Jake studied Blackwood's face. Weak chin, soft hands, the look of a man who'd never been tested in real combat. A politician playing soldier. Where's Rodriguez? Safe for the moment. Along with Miss Santos, their continued well-being depends entirely on your cooperation, Mr. Morrison. Jake let the shotgun hang loose, but his fingers stayed near the trigger guard. What do you want? Colonel Donovan sends his compliments and an invitation to join him at Devil's Canyon. Your wife is most eager to see you again. And if I refuse? Blackwood gestured toward the alley behind the buildings. A woman's whimper carried on the wind. Maria, still alive but suffering. Then this town burns, starting with the sheriff's office. Your friend Rodriguez dies slowly. Miss Santos. Blackwood's smile was obscene. Well, my men have been in the wilderness for some time. They have appetites. Rage built in Jake's chest like a boiler under pressure. But 17 years of command experience had taught him when to fight and when to wait for better odds. How do I know Donovan will keep his word about my wife? You don't, but you know what happens if you refuse. Blackwood pulled out a pocket watch, checked the time with theatrical precision. You have 10 seconds to decide, Morrison. Your wife's life against your pride. Jake Morrison had faced this choice before. At Chancellorsville, when following Donovan's illegal order might have saved his men's lives. He'd chosen conscience over expedience then, and watched good soldiers die for his moral stance. But this wasn't Chancellorsville. This was his wife, his friends, innocent people who'd get slaughtered while he stood on principle. I'll come, but I want to see Rodriguez first. Proof he's alive. Blackwood nodded to one of his men, who disappeared into the alley. Moments later, Tom Rodriguez appeared, hands bound behind his back, blood trickling from a split lip. But his eyes were alert, and when they met Jake's gaze, Tom gave the slightest nod. I'm ready, the look said. Just give me the signal. Satisfied? Blackwood asked. Jake nodded slowly, then let the shotgun slip from his fingers to clatter on the boardwalk. The sound of the weapon hitting wood was the signal. Tom Rodriguez drove his elbow backward into his guard's solar plexus, spinning away as the man doubled over. At the same instant, Jake dove left, rolling behind a water trough as gunfire erupted from the alley where Maria had been hidden. Not Confederate gunfire, the sharp crack of a Spencer repeating rifle in the hands of someone who knew how to use it. Maria Santos, freed and fighting back. The street exploded into chaos. Blackwood's men scattered for cover, but they'd been positioned to watch Jake, not to defend against crossfire from the buildings. Tom had vanished into the maze of alleys behind the main street. The Confederate soldiers were caught in the open, professional training warring with sudden confusion. Jake rolled to his feet, drew his Colt, and put 2 rounds center mass to the nearest Confederate. The man spun and fell, his rifle clattering away across the boardwalk. Kill Morrison! Blackwood screamed from behind a horse trough. Kill him now! But the street was full of gun smoke and running figures. A minecart full of ore exploded in a shower of rock and metal. Patrick O'Brien announcing his arrival with his usual subtlety. Through the chaos and noise, Jake caught a glimpse of a familiar figure on the roof of the general store, rifle steady as death itself. Deadeye Rodriguez, earning his nickname all over again. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes. When the smoke cleared, 4 Confederates lay dead in the street. Blackwood crouched behind his makeshift cover, hands raised in surrender, face white with shock. Jake walked over slowly, Colt trained on the mare's head. Where exactly is Devil's Canyon Fortress? Blackwood's voice cracked. 15 miles northeast, old army outpost from the Indian Wars. But Morrison, you don't understand. Colonel Donovan has 80 men. 80? You can't! Jake's pistol barrel touched Blackwood's forehead. How many guarding my wife? 6, maybe 8. But they'll kill her if you attack. Maybe. Jake pulled back the hammer. But they'll definitely kill her if I don't. How many days until the Fort Helena attack? 2. 2 days. Blackwood was sweating now, despite the cool mountain air. He's got inside help at the fort, a supply sergeant named Kowalski who owes gambling debts. The plan is to poison the guards during the evening meal change, then open the gates from inside. Tom Rodriguez appeared at Jake's shoulder, Maria Santos beside him. Both looked ready for war. Patrick O'Brien emerged from the wreckage of the minecart, grinning despite a powder burn on his cheek and carrying a bag of what looked like mining explosives. Orders, Captain? Tom asked, falling back into the old military formality. Jake Morrison looked around at his surviving unit. 4 people against 80 Confederate veterans and deserters. Impossible odds by any reasonable measure. But these weren't reasonable people. These were the survivors of Chancellorsville, Gettysburg, Cold Harbor. They'd followed each other through hell itself and lived to tell about it. "We're going to save my wife," Jake said quietly. "Then we're going to stop a war." Maria Santos checked her rifle, face grim as carved granite. "Just like old times." "Just like old times," Jake agreed. But as they prepared to ride toward Devil's Canyon, Jake Morrison knew this would be their last mission together. Win or lose, the war that had shaped their lives was finally coming to an end. The approach to Devil's Canyon took them through country that God might have created specifically for ambushes. Towering red stone walls rose on either side of the narrow trail, carved by centuries of flash floods into a maze of blind corners and hidden alcoves. Perfect killing ground for anyone holding the high ground. Jake Morrison led the small column, his eyes constantly scanning the canyon walls above. Behind him rode Tom Rodriguez and Patrick O'Brien, while Maria Santos brought up the rear, her Spencer rifle ready for instant action. 4 against 80, odds that would have seemed like suicide to anyone who hadn't survived the Civil War. Billy Martinez had caught up with them 5 miles out of Cedar Falls, refusing to be left behind despite Jake's orders. The boy rode now with the grim determination of someone who'd already lost one father to war and wasn't about to lose another. "There," Jake said quietly, pointing ahead to where the canyon opened into a natural amphitheater. Devil's Canyon Fortress squatted against the far wall like a malignant growth. Originally built as a cavalry outpost during the Apache campaigns of the 1870s, it had been abandoned for nearly a decade. Now, Confederate battle flags flew from its watchtowers, and Jake could see sentries moving along the walls. "Entrances?" Tom asked, pulling out a battered spyglass. "Main gate facing us. Postern gate on the north wall. Probably blocked. The old Sally Port on the east side might still be open, but it's a death trap if they know you're coming." Patrick O'Brien studied the fortress with a demolitions expert's eye. "Walls are adobe and stone. I could bring them down, but not without risking everyone inside." "Including Sarah," Jake said grimly. They retreated to a sheltered alcove to make their plans. The sun was setting, painting the canyon walls blood red. In a few hours, darkness would give them the only advantage they were likely to get. "Here's how we play it," Jake said, sketching in the dirt with a stick. "Tom, you circle around to the north wall. If you can get inside, your job is to find Sarah and get her out. Patrick, you take the east approach. Create noise and confusion, but no explosions until Sarah is clear." "What about you?" Maria asked. "I'm going through the front gate." The silence stretched until Tom finally spoke. "Jake, that's suicide. They'll cut you down before you get within 100 yards. Maybe, but Donovan wants me alive. His whole plan is based on personal revenge. Killing me from a distance won't satisfy him. He'll want to gloat first, explain how clever he's been." Maria shook her head. "Too risky. We should—" The sound of approaching hoofbeats cut her off. All 5 veterans melted into the shadows, weapons ready. Around the bend came a single rider under a white flag, a young Confederate sergeant, barely old enough to shave. "Jake Morrison," the boy called out. "Colonel Donovan requests your immediate presence for a parley." Jake stepped into the open, hands visible but near his weapons. "What's the message, son?" "The colonel says to tell you he's had a most interesting conversation with your wife. She's told him all about your resources." The sergeant's voice carried a smug satisfaction that made Jake's blood boil. "He's prepared to make you a deal." "What kind of deal?" "Your life and freedom in exchange for information about Fort Helena's defenses. Seems Mrs. Morrison mentioned you've done supply runs there. Know the guard rotations." Jake felt the pieces clicking together in his mind. Sarah was alive and thinking. She'd fed Donovan information that might be useful, but wasn't immediately verifiable, buying time and probably gathering intelligence of her own. Tell Donovan I'll meet him at sunset, main gate of the fortress. He says to come alone. I will. The sergeant wheeled his horse and galloped back toward the fortress. Jake watched him go, mind already working through the implications. He's not planning to honor any deal, Tom said quietly. I know, but it gets me inside the walls. Jake turned to face his friends. His family, really. These were the only people left who understood what they'd all been through together. Tom, give me 20 minutes, then move on the north wall. Patrick, when you hear gunfire from inside, that's your signal. Maria, he hesitated. Someone needs to ride to Fort Helena. Warn them about the attack. Like hell, Maria said flatly. I'm not leaving you to face this alone. Maria, we all go home tonight, or none of us do. That's how this unit works, Captain, and you know it. Billy stepped forward, jaw set with determination beyond his years. I'll ride to Fort Helena. I know the trails, and I can make better time alone. Jake studied the boy. No longer a boy, really. The events of the past few days had burned away whatever remained of Billy's youth. It's 40 miles through Apache country. Then I better get started. Billy checked his weapons, mounted his horse. Tell them Sergeant Kowalski is compromised. Tell them the attack comes tomorrow night during evening mess. As Billy disappeared into the gathering darkness, Jake Morrison felt a strange sense of completion. The boy would make it. He had the same stubborn determination that had carried Jake's unit through the worst days of the war. All right, Jake said to the remaining three, let's go finish this. As sunset painted Devil's Canyon in shades of blood and gold, Jake Morrison walked slowly toward the main gate of the fortress. His hands hung loose at his sides, but every nerve was alert for treachery. The massive wooden gate swung open to reveal Colonel Marcus Donovan himself, resplendent in a Confederate colonel's uniform that looked like it had been tailored yesterday. Behind him stood a dozen armed men, all in military formation. Jake Morrison, Donovan said with false warmth, punctual as always. Do come in. Jake stepped through the gateway, noting the positioning of guards, the layout of the courtyard, the location of buildings where Sarah might be held. Professional habits from a lifetime of warfare. Where's my wife? Safe and comfortable, I assure you, though she's proven to be quite the conversationalist. Donovan's smile held genuine malice. Did you know she's been keeping track of supply schedules for Fort Helena? Fascinating reading. Jake kept his face neutral. She always was good with details. Indeed, which brings us to our arrangement. Your freedom for information about Fort Helena's defenses, guard rotations, weapons inventory. And if I refuse? Donovan gestured to one of his men, who disappeared into a low stone building. Moments later, he emerged supporting a figure in a torn dress. Sarah Morrison, alive but clearly battered. Even from 50 feet away, Jake could see the bruises on her face, the way she favored her left side. But her eyes were clear, alert, and when they met his across the courtyard, he saw not just fear, but determination. The choice is yours, Jake, Donovan said softly. Betray your country one more time, and I'll let you both ride out of here. Refuse, and you can watch her die slowly. Jake Morrison had spent 17 years reliving the moment at Chancellorsville when he'd chosen principle over pragmatism. This time, the stakes were even higher. Not just Sarah's life, but potentially thousands of civilians if Fort Helena fell to Donovan's planned rebellion. But as he looked into his wife's eyes across the courtyard, Jake saw something that changed everything. Sarah wasn't just afraid, she was ready, and she was positioned exactly where she needed to be. All right, Jake said loudly, I'll tell you what you want to know. The words carried clearly across the courtyard, loud enough for Tom Rodriguez to hear from his position on the north wall, loud enough for Patrick O'Brien to hear from the east approach. loud enough for Maria Santos to hear from her sniper's nest in the rocks outside the main gate. Donovan's smile widened with triumph. I knew you'd see reason eventually. Fort Helena has a garrison of 150 men, Jake began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute truth. They rotate the guard every 4 hours. Main armory is in the central compound, secondary weapons storage in the north barracks. As he spoke, giving Donovan accurate but ultimately useless information, Jake watched his wife carefully. Sarah Morrison had spent 15 years married to a cavalry officer. She knew military signals when she saw them. When Jake touched his hat brim with his left hand, Sarah nodded almost imperceptibly. When he shifted his weight to his right foot, she tensed like a coiled spring. And when Jake Morrison drew his Colt Peacemaker and put a bullet through Colonel Marcus Donovan's black heart, Sarah threw herself sideways into the guard holding her, sending them both tumbling behind a pile of supply crates. The courtyard exploded into gunfire and chaos. Jake rolled left, using Donovan's falling body as cover, while his Colt spoke again and again. A Confederate sergeant spun and fell, clutching a shattered shoulder. Another dove for cover behind a water trough, only to find himself facing Tom Rodriguez's rifle as the sheriff appeared on the fortress wall like an avenging angel. Patrick O'Brien's voice carried across the noise. Fire in the hole! Followed by an explosion that brought down a section of the east wall in a shower of adobe and stone. Through the smoke and confusion, Jake fought his way towards Sarah's position. A Confederate private rose up in front of him, bayonet leveled, but Maria Santos's Spencer rifle cracked from the canyon wall, and the man pitched forward without a sound. Sarah! Jake shouted over the gunfire. Here! She emerged from behind the supply crates, helped by Tom Rodriguez, who'd somehow made it down from the wall in the middle of the firefight. Can you ride? Jake asked, reloading as bullets whined overhead. Better than I can walk right now, Sarah replied with the grim humor that had made him fall in love with her 20 years ago. The battle for Devil's Canyon Fortress lasted exactly 8 minutes. When the smoke finally cleared, 12 Confederates lay dead in the courtyard, including Colonel Marcus Black Hand Donovan. The rest had fled into the wilderness, their grand scheme of a new Confederate territory dying with their leader. Jake Morrison knelt beside Donovan's body, looking down at the man who'd haunted his dreams for 17 years. No satisfaction in the killing, just a weary sense of accounts finally balanced. Was it worth it? Sarah asked, limping over to stand beside her husband. Jake helped her to her feet, noting the way she leaned on him but refused to show weakness. Ask me in 20 years. Tom Rodriguez appeared at his shoulder, reloading his rifle with practiced efficiency. Jake, we found papers in Donovan's quarters, plans for the attack on Fort Helena, lists of supporters, financial records. How many were involved? Maybe 50 active conspirators across 3 territories. But with Donovan dead, Tom shrugged. Rebellion's like a snake. Cut off the head, and the body dies pretty quick. Patrick O'Brien emerged from the ruins of the east wall, grinning despite a powder burn on his cheek. Found their ammunition supply, enough black powder to level half of Montana territory. Secure it, Jake ordered, falling back into command mode. We'll turn it over to the territorial authorities. Maria Santos called down from her position in the rocks. Riders approaching from the south. Looks like cavalry. Jake squinted into the setting sun, making out the distinctive blue uniforms and guidon flags of the U.S. Army. Billy had gotten through. The boy had made his ride and brought help. As the cavalry column thundered into Devil's Canyon, led by a young lieutenant who couldn't have been much older than Billy, Jake Morrison finally allowed himself to believe it was over. The ghosts of Chancellorsville could rest at last. 6 months later, Jake Morrison stood on the front porch of Silver Creek Ranch, watching the sunrise paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson. The Territorial Governor's Commission as U.S. Marshal for Montana Territory lay on the table beside him, signed and official. At 42, he was finally ready to trade his role as a haunted veteran for something more constructive. Sarah emerged from the kitchen, moving easier now that her injuries had healed, carrying 2 cups of coffee that steamed in the cool morning air. She'd grown stronger in the months since Devil's Canyon, not just physically, but in the way she carried herself. The experience had burned away whatever softness remained from their peaceful years, leaving behind someone who understood the cost of freedom. "Any regrets?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. Jake considered the question seriously. Donovan was dead, his conspiracy shattered. The plans for Fort Helena had led to the arrest of Confederate sympathizers across 3 territories. Montana Territory would remain part of the United States, eventually becoming a state with its own star on the flag. But the unit that had survived the Civil War had finally disbanded for good. Tom Rodriguez had resigned his sheriff's badge and moved to California with Maria Santos, seeking a place where their wartime partnership could become something more personal. Patrick O'Brien had disappeared entirely, leaving behind only a note that read, "Gone to see what's beyond the next mountain." "No regrets," Jake said finally. "Some chapters need proper endings." A dust cloud on the horizon caught his attention, a lone rider approaching at an easy lope. Jake's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, but he relaxed when he recognized the horse and rider. Billy Martinez, now Billy Morrison, following the formal adoption proceedings 3 months earlier, reined in at the porch, grinning broadly. The boy had grown into his role as Jake's deputy marshal, earning respect throughout the territory for his steady nerves and unwavering honesty. "Morning, Pa," Billy said, dismounting with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle. "Ma," Sarah smiled at the title, still getting used to being a mother at 38. "Any word from town?" "Yes, ma'am. Message from the territorial capital. They're sending 2 more deputy marshals to work under you. Seems like the governor wants to make sure Montana Territory stays peaceful as we head toward statehood." Jake nodded approvingly. The territory was growing, changing. Railroad surveyors had been through the previous month, mapping routes that would connect Montana to the rest of the nation. With that connection would come new people, new opportunities, and new problems that would require steady hands to solve. "What do you think?" he asked Sarah, ready to help tame the American frontier. "I think Montana Territory could use lawmen who understand the difference between justice and vengeance," she replied. "And I think you've earned the right to help build something instead of just tearing it down." Jake pinned the marshal's badge to his vest, feeling its weight settle into place. It felt right, using his military experience to protect settlers and townsfolk instead of hunting down ghosts from old wars. "Tell the governor we'll take whatever help he sends," Jake said to Billy. "But they'll need to understand this isn't some eastern city with gas lamps and paved streets. Out here, a man's word still means something. And justice comes from the barrel of a gun more often than from a judge's gavel." Billy's grin widened. "Yes, sir. I'll make sure they understand." As the sun climbed higher over Silver Creek Ranch, Jake Morrison felt something he hadn't experienced since before the war. Genuine peace. Not the exhausted quiet of a man too tired to fight anymore, but the deep contentment of someone who'd found his proper place in the world. The ghosts of Chancellorsville would always be with him. Tom, Charlie, and Dutch would never ride the range again. The America that emerged from the Civil War would never be the innocent nation that had entered it. But sometimes endings made new beginnings possible. Jake Morrison, United States Marshal for Montana Territory, settled back in his chair to watch another day begin in the American West. Behind him, his wife hummed while she worked in the kitchen. Beside him, his adopted son cleaned his rifle with the meticulous care of a professional lawman. And for the first time in 17 years, Jake Morrison was exactly where he belonged. The Congressional Medal of Honor in its presentation case caught the morning light from the mantelpiece inside. It would stay there, a reminder of duty fulfilled and sacrifices honored. But it was no longer a burden waiting to be justified, just a piece of metal commemorating one chapter in a larger story that was still being written. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the valley, the first of many that would bring civilization to Montana territory. Jake Morrison smiled, knowing that when those trains arrived, they'd find a land worth settling and laws worth respecting. Some wars end with treaties, others end with surrender. This one had ended with the simple decision to build something better than what came before. 3 shots had destroyed everything Jake Morrison thought he'd built. But from that destruction came something stronger. A family forged in fire, a territory made safe for decent folks, and the knowledge that some wars are worth fighting to the very end. In Montana territory, they still tell the story of Marshal Jake Morrison in the Battle of Devil's Canyon. How one man's refusal to let the past poison the future saved a territory from another civil war and helped forge one more piece of the United States of America. Some stories end with violence. This one ended with hope. And sometimes that makes all the difference in the world.